Hello and welcome to what should be the last video before the mini expansion goes live. So this shouldn't be super out of date because it is unlimited. That's why I tend to do these unlimited videos before this, but we are doing unlimited ramp dragon. So I was planning to do a Zeal Dragon deck. I kind of decided not to do that instead and just go with a pretty straight up ramp dragon, and I actually had a little bit of fun with this deck. It's quite drawn out though, so I don't expect this to be the fast kind of game ender real quick like Zeal and stuff are. This was definitely on the slower side, but I think it definitely has its own place in consistency. So we are going to get right into it and check it out because we have some long games to look at. The first game for this video will be against Portal. This is, again, like I said at the beginning of the video, quite a drawn out game as it does take quite a while to go through these, since this deck does tend to be on the slower side, not of getting up, but with what else is in the meta at the moment. I've seen a lot of Portal, a lot of Blood, and a lot of Haven. Those three classes really get drawn out by this deck quite well. Blood in particular is usually the easier of the ones to beat since it is drawn out. Once you draw out a Blood player, they typically have nowhere to go. So I decided to go for an early Poseidon 2-drop play here against Portal. Knowing what Portal can do in the early game, getting out an early drop I thought was the most important play I could make. Dragon Oracle, of course, perfect play. You play it whenever you can get a chance, since it's just too good not to, and Draconic Fervor on next turn makes perfect sense leading up to that, so I definitely want to take that while I got the option to as well. And of course, our opponent's just going full-on flood mode here, which is not a great thing for us, with a really nice setup for them and really easy lines of play. I can easily go for the Elia Dragon Sword though, and the Blazing Breath has some removal. With the White Frost Dragon Unit, just to kind of make up that extra ground that I might need here. As we get ready for stuff like Hulking Giant, Genesis, and of course, Raging Dragon. As they're all the really devastating big cards that really can stall out an opponent quite well, and that's usually what I like to aim for. So Deus Ex Machina, that should be pretty reasonable. Again, we have Hulking, which is the perfect counter to most of these decks. While seeming to be on the slower side, he does do a very nice job. And Icarus, not really a problem. They're only going to get one ping off that, waste about 3 cards, and then I should be fine. Especially since Radiant Artifact's the play. So they can remove the Hulking right now, as is. They've probably got better options to do so, as analyzing, we can see here. But since they are wasting so many resources and so many cards dealing with one Hulking, I'm always in a positive position there, so that's always nice. And I don't tend to use the Evo on Hulking too often, although I do like to if I get the opportunity. Holding off on using it usually isn't the best course of action sometimes, and sometimes it is. It's just very situational, it seems, with this deck, on which playstyle you want to go for with Hulking Giant. And of course, the Acceleratium, Analyzing Artifact, all the normal stuff that you would expect from Portal. The Maisha play was actually a little interesting. They left it up for me to have to take out, which is a little bit of a pain because it's a mandatory target this late into the game, as an Evo on it basically will end us. Fortunately, the Masamune and the Poseidon play is a great combo. Still one of the better combos in Dragon. And that does at least force them to have to use, again, a lot of cards to remove this or risk taking some heavy damage. That's definitely not what you want as a Portal player. The less damage you can take is usually the better. Now they've got an alright chance here, if they want to take it. With the Acceleratium, they're definitely getting a lot of damage in. As far as removal goes. So they managed to remove everything pretty effectively while setting up a really nice board. I can't really fault that board at all. They're definitely digging through the deck a lot though, thanks to their resonance, which is good for us, and in this case, Breath of Salamander even better. The more boards I can keep wiping out, the less likely they are just to win the game off it. Which is why I also haven't used Genesis yet, just in case I need to use its removal effect with our Evo point. Since this is one of the few cases where that is actually a really viable strategy. And I'm actually starting to lean towards decking out. That may be the best option to go for against the Portal player. As I feel like they can't generate enough artifacts to really keep up with how much they're milling, so it's definitely a good sign for us. So I decided to take the Genesis this time, because with the Evo, that is straight up 9 damage to face. We can also not really do anything else this turn, but we're not taking lethal damage by any means right now. The only real issue would have been a Maisha, and I feel like at this point in the game, we've already seen, what, 2 Maishas? The third one, odds are they've either milled it already, or they just don't want to play it straight out. I'm not really sure. It was definitely a risk that I had to take, but with no other real play, dying to a Maisha would have happened either way, so I may as well take the option that gives me the highest damage potential that turn. There is the Analyzing Mystic, so they're heavy draw right now. And they're in Resonance, which is even worse. So now they literally have 0 cards in their deck. I end up getting Hulking Giant, not that we need it. Blazing Breath onto the Analyzing Artifact is lethal as well, which I didn't happen to realize at first, as I was just playing the board, but I did realize on my second Blazing Breath, and a very easy way to win the game, even if it was fairly drawn out. The next match is against Haven, which is a very popular unlimited deck. No real surprise, I mean, Haven, popular. Who would have believed it, to be honest? So Genesis, Hulking, and Poseidon are really, really late game cards. I had literally no ramp, no real playable cards, and traded out for what is pretty average, to be honest. Not really a big fan of this hand going first, obviously, as it makes it a lot more awkward to ramp up at all, especially since we drew Draconic, which again, very difficult card to make work going first right now, without any ramp at all in my early stages. So what I'd really need is a ramp right now, basically, to actually make it worth it. Unfortunately, we don't have that. So I've just got to kind of play the board a little bit, go face, just kind of wait it out until I can get to a point where ramp actually becomes a viable option. And that is certainly not right now. I could have went for the Dragon Sword. Probably should have, to be honest. If I had at least played it, I would have had something on board. Although, then this Elena's Prayer would have been just as bad. At least this time we've got something like Sybil that we can just kind of play out, get the ramp, have the healing, I guess, even though it's going to make no difference, and it's just a straight up body. Even if we don't use the Evo on the Dragon Sword, at least we got a ramp finally in the game, so we are putting ourselves ahead of the curve a little bit more. Even though turn 7 isn't looking too crash hot, as we have very little in the way to remove this. Although that's not a bad one for turn 7, honestly. It's probably one of the best cards I could have got as far as just removing this outright. And still being able to play Draconic, so why not? Actually, sorry, we cannot play Draconic because of the spell effect. Not that mattered too much. Dragon Sword can come down now with no Evo, so it's just a 2-2 body, so why not just get it out? Okay, so now things can be a little more interesting. So we have the Raging Dragon, which can actually be played next turn with the Poseidon now, so that is great, that extra ramp, putting us that little bit more ahead. I'm really looking to go for a Bahamut play though, or a Dragon of Disaster with Genesis there, and just kind of deal massive damage. Did decide to, of course, take the Bahamut play here, just remove outright all the followers, set up a 9-9 that's going to be hard to deal with, try and force that Evo from the opponent as much as I can, even though the Angelic Smite was not a fun card to have to deal with. But it gives me a free turn to play Genesis, because who doesn't want a 7-9 to go face? 7-8 to go face on turn 10? Why would I not want that? So they are going pretty wide here. But this should at least force the Evo play, I'm hoping, to go against the Genesis, which will mean that anything I play from here on out has to be dealt with through mostly spells, and it's very hard to deal with followers as they are lacking those Evos. And it doesn't matter how much they buff these cards, a Bahamut will immediately wipe them out, so I'm really not too worried. The draw is really the only problem here. The Zoe did get a absolute crazy amount of actual value, and that's really going to slow us down. So Unicorn Knight, Iron Knuckle Nuns, they weren't really too much of an issue normally. It's a lot of spells to use, that's really about it. And most of these followers can actually be wiped with the Poseidon combo. Unfortunately, I can't get rid of everything effectively, so I will have to lose the 9-5 here with our Bahamut, but it does guarantee that we're going to have a really good board against an empty one. So that's a positive at least. I could have left up the 5-7 and gone face, which is actually what I ended up doing, surprisingly. For some reason, I thought that I'd actually wiped it, but I must have done that in another Haven matchup. I did play a fair few Haven matchups, so sorry that I went off on the wrong tangent there. That sort of situation is actually fairly common, unfortunately. But now, Hulking Giant. This card's actually amazing for dealing with the Elena prayer cards. I've found that even with 2 on board, Hulking Giant can take out most average followers that only get 1 or 2 buffs. And even if it can't, it deals a significant chunk of damage that you can then clean up with other cards, so it's actually really good. So Tender Rabbit Healer, that's not a fun one. They pretty much healed all the damage we dealt with the Bahamut. Definitely not a good thing. And we do now need to actually clear this, so we do get a fairly effective way to do so. Using the Hulking Giant, still getting 1 damage in, setting up some draws so that we can actually have some cards in our hand. While also dealing damage is not the worst thing in the world. And we get to keep up our 7-2 now, which is great with the hulking. So you really can't complain too much in that situation in particular. This buff, though, was not a fun one. I had to come up with a way to go around this without, of course, completely crippling myself. Blazing Breath was a fairly decent option if I had to pick one. And just get a few more things on board, and we're not getting another hulking, which is great. Back-to-back hulkings against Elena are pretty ideal. It's about as good as a back-to-back Bahamut as far as just dealing with resources. But these are very drawn-out games, and that's not usually a great thing against Elena. We're definitely trying to force them to burn out more resources than we have, which is not impossible, it's just not an enjoyable experience, to be honest. So I do have to clear this. I don't want to lose too much here, so since I'm going to lose my 7-1 no matter what, I decided to go with this strategy and not let the Bane kill the 7-3 because it will kill the Hulking Giant. And I wanted to keep that up as high as possible stats-wise, and didn't end up mattering because, of course, Decree hit the board. But at least now we've seen most of the resources wasted, or not so much wasted, but used in a way that isn't going to be super effective against us. And now we can pretty comfortably go for another Poseidon Masamudo Raging Dragon combo. To be honest, I'm surprised I don't put Poseidon in this deck. Not Poseidon, I'm sorry. Satan in this deck, as he would be an actually okay option as a one-off, considering most of the games I played were very drawn out and got to this point where I was usually reasonably low on cards. So if I potentially ran one Prince of Darkness or Kakaida, sorry, whatever it is, I can't remember now, Satan, that would probably be okay. I could potentially use that to my advantage fairly easily, and that wouldn't be such a bad option. Go back to more of a ramp Satan deck instead of just the standard ramp deck. It's very, very possible. So they're going all in buffs here, taking basically everything they can to buff up. The Hulking Giant, though, was pretty much a perfect draw. I really couldn't have asked for anything too much better, as it does allow us to actually wipe this out. And now they're top decking, which is great for us, not so great for them. And we are on the negative as far as draw goes, so we do have to be a little careful. Although the God's Horn Elixir, again, is a nightmare. Having to deal with that thing basically just mitigates our whole Hulking Giant play and stalls us out another turn where we can only deal a little bit of damage. At least this time we can kind of swarm the board a little bit and draw again, which Genesis isn't a bad card to get. Definitely don't mind taking it. The Smite, not really crippling yet. Servant of Repose, though, especially with the buff ward, is not good. As that's a huge follower now. Our really only good way to clear that is Raging Dragon, straight up as the best option, since it is a 1-for-1 trade, and we don't actually lose anything due to its effect, so really it's just killing off the opponent's follower for nothing at that point. We can't play our Furballs, though, unless we're at risk of dying and we're not going to overdraw, so at this point I'm really limited to what's in my hand, and fortunately, since our opponent only had that unicorn right there, wasn't going to be a problem at all. So while definitely long and drawn out games, most games I felt like I always had an out. Usually I always had options which were good. I could take a certain route with the gameplay style. Usually, again, that meant longer games. I found most of my games running up the 10 to 15 minute mark, sometimes even straight up to the 20 mark. Mostly around that, averaging probably 15 though, where you're either going to win or lose, whether you could get the ramp you needed, or whether your opponent just had absolutely crazy plays and you didn't happen to have, say, a Bahamut, Hulking Dragonoot, or some other form of decent removal like the Poseidon combo to really mitigate what kind of damage you'd be taking. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, you'll find the links in the description below. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Until next time, guys, see ya.